We are on DAF Chaf Hey Amid Aleph. We are on the last wide line, and we're just describing the process of Kriya, and then we'll go into the process of Hesped. Kinoch Nafshi, a lot of Agadata today. Kinoch Nafshi de Rav Safra lo Koru Rabbanon Alei. When Rav Safra passed away, the Rabbanon, a group of rabbis, did not tear Kriya for him. Amri lo garminan minei, arguing that we never studied directly from him, and therefore he wasn't our Rebbe, so therefore we're not obligated to tear. Amr lahu Abaya mitanya harab shemeis chacham shemeis tanya. So Abaya says that's a mistake. It doesn't say that if your Rebbe passes away you should tear Kriya. It says if a chacham passes away. A chacham is any great scholar who passes away, even if you didn't study from him. Va'od, and furthermore, even according to your argument, kol yom shmaitse bepumin b'vei medrasha. Every single day we hear Rav Safra quoted in the Beis Medrash, so we're learning Torah from him, maybe not directly from his mouth, but he's cited on a daily basis. So of course we should tear Kriya for him. So Sover Madahava Hava. So this group of rabbis felt remorse, but they figured, okay, it's for fallen, right? What are we going to do? It's already past the time that he died, so there's no more point. Now the burial hasn't taken place yet, so therefore, Amar Lahu Abaya Tanina Chacham Kolzman Sha'oskim Behesped Chayavin Likroa. So Abaya says yes, but as long as we're preparing for the Hesped, you're obligated to tear. So Savr LaMikra LaAltra, so they figured, okay, let's tear right now. Amar Lahu Abaya Tanya Chacham Kavodo Behespedo, and Abaya says to them, no. It's now between the death and the burial. You have to wait for the time of the actual funeral ceremony, the time of the Hesped, and that's when the appropriate time is to tear. That's what the Brisa says for a Chacham. Next, Kinach Nafshe de Rav Huna Savr LaOsuve Sefer Torah Purye. So now here's another interesting story. When Rav Huna passed away, the rabbis thought that they would pay him proper tribute by placing a Sefer Torah on his stretcher where his body was. And Amar lahu Rav Chisda milsa de bechaye lo svira le hashta leikom li avid le. So Rav Chisda says in surprise, he says, this is a man who during his lifetime was opposed to such a practice. Why would you then do it for him in his death? Da Amar Rav Tachlifa ana chazise la Rav Huna teboy la mesav apurye v'havamanach Sefer Torah alei v'kafkada ara v'osiv Sefer Torah iluya. That I once saw Rav Huna wanted to sit on a certain couch or a certain bed, and there was a Sefer Torah on it. And he said, I can't sit on the same surface as a Sefer Torah. So he took a jug and put it on the ground and put the Sefer Torah to rest on top of the jug so that it would be on a different surface. So what do you see from here? Alma kesavar asr leishiv al gabi mita shesefer Torah munach. So you see that he holds that it's asr. So therefore, why would you put a Sefer Torah on the same surface that his dead body is resting upon? It would mortify, quite literally, it would mortify Rav Huna, right? So anyway, lo havanafik purya mibava. So another aspect of the story of this levaya of Rav Huna was that they couldn't get the stretcher out the door. It was too wide. Savar l'shulshule derech gagin. So they said, you know what? There's a skylight. Let's bring the body with the stretcher through the skylight, which is wider, and we'll transfer him over the roof. So Amar lahu Rav Chisda hagamirna minei chacham kvodo derech Pesach. So Rav Chisda says, I learned from Rav Huna that the proper respect that you pay to a chacham is to pass him through the front door. That's the most public and way of escorting him out. So you can't do that. So Savar lashnuye mi purya lepurya. So they figured, okay, you know what? We'll get a narrower stretcher and we'll transfer the body from this wide stretcher to a narrow stretcher. Amr lahu Rav Chisda hachi gamirna minei chacham kavoda b'mita rishona. He says, no, I learned from Rav Huna that you can't do that. You have to keep him on the original stretcher upon which he is placed. That it would be disrespectful to just transfer him like changing his clothes. The Amar of Yehuda Amar Rav minayin lechacham shekvoda b'mita rishona, as Yehuda said in the name of Rav, how do you know that you have to, the proper honor is to keep him on the original stretcher upon which he was placed? Shenamar, because it says in Shmuel Beis that when they were bringing the Aron back from the Philistine captivity, it says, Vayarkivu es Aron ha'elokim al egla chadasha. So it says that they brought it back on the new wagon that had been provided by the Philistines. And they used that very same wagon to transport it all the way to Ir David. So you see, even though there might have been a justification to remove it from the Philistine wagon and to put it on some other mode of transport that was more local, you see that no, there was an insistence upon making sure that it was remaining on its original transport. So that's the same thing you have to do for a chacham. That's the respect. So anyway, so what was the solution? They're stuck. They can't transfer him to a narrow stretcher. They can't put him through the skylight. So what do? Pros bava ve'af kuha. They basically took a sledgehammer and broke open the door and widened it so that they could get Rav Huna out the front door. Pasach alei Rabbi Abba. So now we talk about the eulogy. Rabbi Abba now begins the eulogy and he says, Roi hoya Rabbeinu shetashre alav shchina. Ella shebavel garmalei, that our teacher was worthy of having the divine presence rest upon him. Meaning he was worthy of prophecy, it sounds like. But it was Bavel. He's lived in the diaspora, so he couldn't be zochet to that kind of prophetic knowledge. So Masiv Rav Nachman bar Chisda, Varmila Rav Chanan bar Chisda, so one of the sages challenges this. He's speaking now, it seems like, in the middle of the Hesped. And he says, Haya Devar Hashem al Yecheskel ben Buzi HaKoin be'eretz Kasdim. But what about the very beginning of Sefer Yecheskel? It says that Yecheskel prophesied in Bavel. So how can you tell me that Bavel is the reason that Rav Huna could not prophesy when we know that Yecheskel prophesied in Bavel? So Tafach alei b'sandole. So Rav Chisda, the father, kicks his son with his shoe to tell him to shut up, without being conspicuous. Amar lei lavamina lach lo titrod alma mai haya shehaya kevar. I've already told you, stop hakin a chinik the oilam. Leave. This is not the time and place to debate a Talmudic issue. And I've already told you what was. Now, what does that mean? What was? So either, like Rashi says, that was a one-time occurrence, an exceptional situation with Yecheskel, or alternatively, and Rabbi Yehuda Levi says this, by the way, also in the Kuzari, he says that Yecheskel prophesied based upon his previous residence in Eretz Yisrael, that the power of Eretz Yisrael resided within Yecheskel even after he left Eretz Yisrael and went to Bavel, and that's the reason. But if a person lived his whole life in Bavel, then he wouldn't have the power to prophesy. Yes.
Wasn't the era of prophecy over? Wasn't the era of prophecy over anyway by this time?
That's an excellent question. That's why I say it's not clear whether it's the actual prophecy or whether it's Ruach HaKodesh, the divine spirit. It's really unclear from the Gemara. But your point is...
Was it location?
You have to look in the Ramchal and Derech Hashem. He goes through the different gradations of divine communication. But there is a difference. Prophecy is much clearer communique, and the Ruach HaKodesh is like just vague messages.
Throwing the shoe reminds me in Iraq when Bush came to speak. Bush.
What was the throwing? Where did you see the throwing of the shoe?
It says right there before.
Oh, what? I'm sorry. He kicked him. He kicked him with his shoe. Yeah.
So this is.
Yeah, it's right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Ki askua lahasam. So they bring Rav Huna's body to be buried in Eretz Yisrael because that was the practice. If a person was very righteous, Eretz Yisrael is a land that tolerates righteous people. So therefore, the practice was to bring a great tzaddik from Bavel to bring his body to Eretz Yisrael. So Amru Leila Rabbi Ami Rabbi Asi Rav Huna Asi. So they said to Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, the great Rav Huna has arrived. He's coming to Eretz Yisrael. So they're not aware that he's coming dead. They think that maybe he's coming to give a lecture, or that he's coming to move to Eretz Yisrael. So Amru ki havinan hasam lahavalan leduyu reishen minei hashta asinan hacha. So asa basrein, that he says when we were living in Bavel, we were so humbled by him because of his superior knowledge that we couldn't lift our heads in his presence. And that's the reason why we had to come to Eretz Yisrael, to be able to leave his shadow, to be able to set up our own yeshiva. But now he's following us; he's going to shut us down again. So that was their fear. So Amru lahu aronoba. So they said, no, he's not opening up a new yeshiva. He's coming in his coffin. So Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi nafuk, Rabbi Ila v'Rabbi Chanina lo nafuk. So Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi went out to greet the casket, and Rabbi Ila and Rabbi Chanina did not. Ika da Amri Rabbi Ila nafak, Rabbi Chanina lo nafak, and also some say that one of the two did go out, and Rabbi Chanina was the one who did not go out. Now, dinafak my taima. So he who went out, why? What was the rationale? The Tanya Aron ha'over mimakom l'makom omdim alav b'shur avam alav birkas avelim b'tanchumei avelim. So the reason is because the Brisa says that if you see an entourage with a casket passing by in your town, then there's an obligation to stand and set up a row of consolers to say the special prayers for the Avel and to give the Say HaMakam, to give the proper consolation. So that's why they went out. But Delo Nafak my time. So what about the rabbi who didn't go out to greet the casket? This is the Tanya, because we have an opposing brisa that says that Arun Ha'over Mimakom L'Makom Einom Dimalav B'Shura Ve'einom Rimalav Birkas Avelim L'Tanchumi Avelim. That you don't do those practices if there's a traveling entourage with a casket. So the question is, how do you reconcile the two brises? Kasha Nahadadi. So the Gemara says, Lo Kasha, Kan Shesheldo Kayemis, Kan B'Shein Sheldo Kayemis. The answer is, when the corpse, specifically referring to the spine of the corpse, is intact and as the body is still in pretty good shape, so then there's a responsibility to show proper respect. When the body has significantly decomposed to the point where the spine is no longer intact, so then, or the spinal column perhaps is what it means, the spine with the skull, I think some people explain what sheldo means. But the point is that when the primary part of the body is no longer intact, there's been so much decomposition, then there's no longer an obligation to show that respect.
So it's less based on makam than it is on time, in other words. In other words, today it's not about makam and makam, it's more about how long it took for the body to get there.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really a question of, you see a traveling entourage. Yeah, so normally in our world you would assume that the body is still intact. For Rav Huna, Sheldo Kayemes Hava, so Delo Nafak Lo Siyamuha Kameh. So Rav Huna, really his body was still intact. But the person who didn't go out, it was not clear to him that he didn't know that was the case. He had assumed perhaps that the body had probably decomposed by then.
That's a can never decompose.
So maybe because he didn't know who it was. Yeah. So Amri Heicha Ninche. So the question then was, where should we bury him? With which tzaddik should we bury him? We know that there's this very important priority that's placed on putting a mace next to good people. You want to put a righteous person, bury him next to another righteous person. So it's from this Gemara. So where should we put him? So Rav Huna rebates Torah b'Yisrael. Rabbi Chia rebates Torah b'Yisrael. Hava. Man ma'ayalei. So let's put him next to Rabbi Chia, because Rav Huna spread a lot of Torah among the Jewish people, and so did Rabbi Chia. So let's put him next to Rabbi Chia. So who's going to take him? Man ma'ayalei. Who will take him into the cave, the catacomb, where Rabbi Chia is buried? So Amar lahu Rav Chaga ana ma'ayalan olei. Du kamte letalmudoi ki havina bar tmanis reishnin, that he says, you know what, let me bring him in, and I'll tell you why. I have Zechus, sufficient Zechus. I finished all of my Torah studies and was able to completely complete my studies by the time I was 18 years old. V'lo chazi li keri, and also I never had a seminal emission. So therefore I have purity, I have great knowledge, and therefore I'm worthy of the deed. And so therefore, umeshama le kamei v'yadi be'uvdei, and furthermore, I was mishamesh Rav Huna. I attended to his needs. I know the way he lived his life. The yom achadis hapicha le ritzuda tefillin v'yasiv ala arboyin ta'anesa. So I once noted that Rav Huna, when he wore his tefillin, was very meticulous to make sure that the black part of the black side of the strap would always be facing outwards, which is the halachic requirement. One time, the black strap turned over to the white side, and he fasted 40 days just for that one thing. Right? So you see how pious Rav Huna was. So Rav Chaga says, let me go. I knew my Rebbe. I was with him all the time, and I'm also virtuous on my own. So Ayale, Havagana Yehuda miyamine diavua v'chizkiya mismale. So Rav Chaga brings Rav Huna's body into the cave. And also, Rav Chia had two great giants of sons who also had passed away. One's name was Chizkiya, and the other name was Yehuda. Yehuda was on his right side, and Chizkiya was buried on his left side. So Amar le Yehuda lechizkiya kum miduchtech l'laburach ara dekoim Rav Huna bahadi dekoim Rav Huna. Yehuda and Chizkiah are dead, but Yehuda turns to Chizkiah and he says to him, "You and I better get up. It's not proper derech eretz. Rav Huna is coming, and we shouldn't be lying down." But behadi dekoyim come bahadei amuda junura. So, it could also be that what Yehuda was telling Chizkiah is, you should get up and move over to make room for Rav Huna to be buried next to our dad. Why Yehuda didn't move over? I guess he felt that Chizkiah was his inferior, and therefore he needed to be buried next to his father. But Chizkiah, you weren't as great as me, so you can afford to move over a little bit and let Rav Huna squeeze in between you and Dad.
Maybe Rav Yehuda was the elder of the two?
Could be he was the elder too. We don't know. There's a lot missing in the story.
On the right.
So, yeah, because he was on the right. So anyway, as Chizkiah was standing up to move over, a big spark of flame, or some kind of flash of flame, a pillar of flame started to shoot up, I guess from place where he was buried. Chazi Rav Chaga Ivis, and Rav Chaga sees this and he's petrified. So Zakve la'arone v'nafak asa, and so he places Rav Huna's casket in position, and I guess he does it in such a way that it shields between him and the flame, and as soon as he makes sure that it's put down properly, he runs out. And the only reason why he was not harmed by the flame was because of the way that he positioned the casket of Rav Huna. This is all very homiletic, and there's a lot of metaphor here that needs to be analyzed further. But the pashtus is that Rav Chaga perhaps was threatened because he placed his own greatness before the fact that he was Mishamish Rav Huna. Really, he should have said, let me go in and bury Rav Huna because I was Mishamish him, and also I have Zechus. But he reversed the order. So the lesson is, the only reason why you're not getting burnt to a crisp by this fire is because Rav Huna is in front of you protecting you. Anyway, Kinach Navshe de Rav Chisda Savar Lo Usuve Sefer Torah Apurye. Now we have a similar story that when Rav Chisda, the son of Rav Huna, passed away, they thought also there, let's put a Sefer Torah on his casket. So Amar Lahu Rabbi Yitzchak Milsa de la Rabbi Lo Svira Le Anan Nekom Na'avid Le. So Rabbi Yitzchak says his Rebbe, Rav Huna, didn't hold of that. In other words, if his Rabbi Rav Huna said you're not supposed to do that, why would we then put a Sefer Torah next to Rav Chisda, the student? So Savar de lo Lemishlal Kira'ayu. They also thought that once they did the burial, it was no longer permitted to stitch together their clothes after having done Kriya. But Amalhu Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ami Chacham Keben Shechziru Pneim Echori Amita Shololin. But Rabbi Yitzchak said we have a halacha that states that if you're going to bury a Talmud Chacham and you tear Kriya for him, as soon as you turn away from the burial procession, then you're allowed to stitch your clothing. Kinach Nafshe de Rabbi Bar Huna v'Rav Hamnuna Askinu Lahasa. Now we have another story. Two great sages pass away approximately the same time, so they're transporting their bodies to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel. The names of the sages are Rabbi Bar Huna. So Rabbi is the son of Rav Huna, who is also a great scholar, and Rav Hamnuna, who we don't know who his father was. They take these bodies of two great sages to Bavel, to Eretz Yisrael. Kimatu Agishra Kamu Gimali. So they get to a narrow bridge, and the two camels that are transporting their remains refuse to go any further. So Amr Lahu Hahu Taya My Hai. So a certain Arab who's witness to what's going on, he says, what's wrong with these camels? So Amrulei Rabbanan de Ka'avdi Yakara Hadadi. Mar Omer Marneil Beresha, Mar Omer Marneil Beresha. So the reason is these camels are refusing to move is because each sage is trying to give honor to the other deceased sage.
After you.
After you. In other words, it's not clear which one should go first on this narrow bridge where only one can pass at a time. So Amar Dinahu de Rabba Barhuna Leil Beresha. So the Arab says, well, if by their names you've described them, it sounds like one of the rabbis is a rabbi, the son of a rabbi. So he should go first because Rav Hamnun is just a rabbi, but his father was not a rabbi. That's a balabatish svara, right? So it's an Arab. So what else is an Arab going to say? He figured, listen, that makes sense to me. So Chalif Gamle de Rabba Barhuna, so I guess camels speak Arabic. So the camel listens to the Arab, and the one with Rabba Barhuna goes first based on the Arab's advice. So Nater Kache Vishine de Ahutaya, and out of because he had showed disrespect to Rav Hamnuna, he was punished by having his molars and his teeth fall out. Bizarre. Okay. Pasach alei hahu yanuka. So then we have the following eulogy. Once these two bodies arrive to Eretz Yisrael, it's time for the hesped. So a young man or a child gets up and gives the following eulogy. And now the Gemara is going to be talking about different poetic lines that were recited for different people's eulogies. Gaza or Geza Yeshishim Allah mi Bavel, that a sprout or an offshoot of the elders has come from Bavel. The Imo Sefer Milchamos, and together with him, we're referring to Rabbi Bar Rav Huna because Rav Huna was the Yeshishim, was the elder. So an offshoot from Rav Huna has come from Bavel, and together with him is his opponent, meaning the person that was his chavrusa that he used to fight with in Torah study, Rav Hamnuna. Ka'as v'kapod huchpalu. These words ka'as and kipod are terms of curse, Rashi says. They have been doubled on this day. And the Aruch also says that these are two birds of prey, that even birds of prey have come to show their respect. Liros b'shod v'shever haba mishinor, to take a look at the destruction and the breakage that has come from Bavel. Katzaf al olamo v'chafas mimenu nefashos, that God is angry with His world by taking away these holy spirits from this world. V'samach bahem kekalar chadasha rochev aravos sas v'samach bevoy love nefesh naki v'tzadik. But at the same time that God is showing His anger with the world by taking these tzaddikim from the world, God is still rejoicing in their arrival to His inner sanctum in Shamayim, like a bride, like a new bride. God is rejoicing with them as if they're his new bride, and riding on the high places, He is rejoicing and happy when the spirit or the soul of a clean and righteous tzaddik comes to him. That was the hesped. Kinoch nafshe de Ravina pasach alei hahu sapdana. When Ravina passed away, the eulogizer said as follows: Timorim heiniu rosh al tzaddik katamar, that the palm trees have all bowed their head because of the loss of this tzaddik who is compared to a palm tree. You know, tzaddik katamar yifrach, right? So nasim leilos kayamim al mesim leilos kayamim. Let us therefore make our nights like days for this tzaddik who made his nights like days. In other words, let's spend the whole night eulogizing, because after all, he spent all his nights studying Torah and holding up the world, and therefore we should not go to bed for him. Amalei Ravashi lebar kipok hahu yoma mayamart. So Ravashi says to Bar Kipok, he says, on the day that Ravina died, what did you say? You're a well-known poetic eulogizer. And as we'll see, that's a double-edged sword. There's an occupational hazard of offering hespedim. Because on the one hand, if you do a good job, then you're the best. But if you say something untoward, you can get into a lot of trouble. So let's see what this Bar Kapok said. Amar le Amina im ba'arazim nafla shalheves mayaso ezove kir. I said like this. He said, if the fire burnt down the cedars, what shall the creeping ivy on the wall have to hope for? Meaning that Ravina was a cedar, a great mighty tree, and if he was consumed by fire, meaning that he died, then surely death will strike us all. And livyasan b'chika hu Allah mayasu digei rikak. That furthermore, I said, if the great Leviathan, the great fish, was caught by a hook, then surely us tiny minnows, what will we do? We'll certainly be caught by a hook. And benachal shotef naflachika mayasu megevim. And finally, he says, if in the raging river of Torah you could still catch this fish with a hook, because even though it's normally much harder to catch a fish when it's moving in the rapids, but if he could be caught by the Malach HaMavis and life be taken, then surely us who are in stagnant waters and are not as scholarly and not as immersed in Torah study, then surely the hook will catch us. So Amrle Bar Abin, so Bar Abin, who's a rival eulogizer, starts to criticize Bar Kapok, and he says, what kind of eulogy is that? Chas v'shalom, dechika v'shalhevis b'tzadika, amina. That I would never use those metaphors of talking about hooks and fires in describing the demise of righteous people. So Umay Amart, so then Ravashi said to him, okay, so then what did you say? when Ravina passed away. Anina bachu dechula avelim velo la aveda shehila menucha va'anu la anacha. So I said, cry for the mourners, the people who have lost Ravina. They're in agony, they're in travail. But don't cry for the lost one. And he calls Ravina the lost object. In other words, he who has been lost. Why? Because the lost object, Ravina, is going to his final resting place and is in a better place. But va'anu la'anacha, but we who are left over, all we can do is sigh in anguish. So chalash daite alayhu. So Rav Ashi got upset with both of them. He thought that they were both giving inappropriate words of eulogy, and the ishapoch kira'ayu. Why? Because Rav Ashi felt, I agree with that the first eulogy was inappropriate. You shouldn't say the fire consumed Ravina or the hook caught Ravina. That's disrespectful. But I'm also upset with Bar Abin, who said that he compared Ravina to a lost object. You shouldn't say that to a guy who dies is a lost object. That was also disrespectful. So Rav Ashi is upset with both of them, and as a result, they get cursed, and their feet become deformed, and they can't walk properly from that day forward. So hahu yoma lo asu la aspude, and so that day, which means, what does that day mean? The day that Rav Ashi died. When Rav Ashi died, they did not come to eulogize him. I guess they didn't want to get into any more trouble. So v'hainu da'amar Rav Ashi lo bar kipotz chalitz v'lo bar abin chalitz. And that's why Rav Ashi said, I think that's what Hahu Yoma means. That's what someone told me this morning. But in any event, that's why Rav Ashi was quoted as saying that these two eulogizers would never be able to do chalitza. Because in order to do chalitza, you have to have, your foot has to be properly formed and can't be crippled in order for the Yavama to be able to remove the shoe properly. But you guys, whose now feet all became mangled as a result of my curse, you would not be fit to do chalitza. So what is the origin of that? It's based on this whole story.
Rabbi, the art scroll seems to say that at the beginning that Rav Ashi was asking, how would you eulogize me? And
I see. So
if it comes to that, not that what did you say when
Ravina passed away.
No.
The only problem I have with that is my amart is what did you say? It seems like if I'm translating the Babylonian grammar properly, it would be, what did you say? But maybe the art scroll is correct. Maybe it's, what would you say on the day of my eulogy? And Rav Ashi got upset, and therefore he didn't want them to be part of his eulogy. Okay. Anyway, Rava kihava asa lediglas, amar leila bar abin kum ema milsa. So when Rava, now just because we were talking about Bar Abin, we're talking about another story where Bar Abin was asked to recite poetry. Here it seems like it's not for a eulogy, but because he had the gift of gab, he knew he was very poetic. So when Rava came to the Tigris River, he said to Bar Abin, say something poetic. So kum ema milsa, koi v'amar bo'u rob shalishis b'mayim zechor v'rachem ta'inu me'acharecha ki isha mibala al taznichenu ka'os me'mara. So a very, very poetic statement, but they sort of like a tefillas haderech using poetry. He said, look, the majority of the shlishis, which is the Jewish people, are called the shlishis because we come from the three patriarchs, or maybe because we come from one of Noach's three sons. It's not clear. But anyway, the Jewish people, the majority of the Jewish people who are embodied in Rava have come now to this water. Please Hashem, remember and have mercy upon us, even though we have strayed from you, like a woman from her husband. Do not forsake us and cause us damage through the water as you do with a sota, with the water. Rabbi, so it was sort of like a tefillas haderech using poetry. Rabbi Chanin chasone devei nesiya hava lo kahavule b'nei. So Rabbi Chanin was the son-in-law of the Nasi, and he didn't have children. Ba'a rachamei v'havule, and he davened, and finally Hashem blessed him with a child. So hahu yoma dehavule nach nafshe. The very day that his wife gave birth, he, Rav Chanin, passed away. So pasach alei hahu sapdana. So the eulogizer said as follows: Simcha letuga nehepacha, that happiness has turned into misery. Sason v'yagon nidbaku, and joy and dread have come together. Be'ez simchaso ne'enach, be'ez chaninaso avad chanino. that at the time of his happiness there is sighing, and at the time of his being granted his wish, then nonetheless Chanino, Chanin has been lost. So Asiku le Chanin al Shemei, and they called the child, the boy, I guess it was born, they called him Chanin Bar Chanin. In other words, it's the same name as his father. Kinach nafshe de Rabbi Yochanan pasach ale Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar. That when Rabbi Yochanan passed away, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar began the eulogy, and he said, Kasha hayom li Yisrael, ki yom bo hashemesh batzaharayim. He says, today is as difficult for the Jewish people as the day when God caused the sun to set in the middle of the afternoon. Dichsiv v'haya bayom hahu v'hevesi hashemesh batzaharayim. It will be on that day, says the Navi in Amos, that I will bring the sun to set in the middle of the afternoon. That was the day that Yoshiyahu died. And so it's just like Yoshiyahu was a great tzaddik and protector of the Jewish people. God causes the sun to set prematurely. This is what is happening today with Rabbi Yochanan's demise. Kinach nafshe de Rabbi Yochanan, Yasiv Rabbi Ami Shiva Ushloshim. And also when Rabbi Yochanan died, Rabbi Ami, his student, sat Shiva and Shloshim for him. So Amar Rabbi Abba Berei de Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, Rabbi Ami da'avad lagarmehu da'avad. That what Rabbi Ami did was not obligatory. He wanted to be machmer for himself, but that's not the halacha. Dahachi Amar Rabbi Chia Bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yechanan afilu Rabo shalim do chachma eno yoshev elav ela yom echad. Because even if your Rebbe dies and he taught you all your wisdom, you still only sit shiva for one day. You don't have to sit shiva for 7 and 30. Kinach nafshe de Rebbe Zera pasach aleyahu sabdana. When Reb Zera died, Reb Zera was born in Bavel, but at some point in his life he made aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. So he dies in Eretz Yisrael, but he's originally from Bavel, so that'll make sense now. He said, Eretz Shinar hara v'yolda, Eretz Tzvi gidala sha'ashu eha, that the land of Bavel gave birth to this man, and Eretz Tzvi, which is another term for Eretz Yisrael, was able to raise its delight, this delightful rabbi. Oyin Allah amra rekes ki abda klichem dasa. Woe am I, says Rekes, another name for Tiveria, because I have lost my beautiful instrument. Kinach nafshe de Rebbe Avahu achisu amude de Kesari Maya. That when Rebbe Avahu passed away, the pillars of Kesari started to drip with water. And someone told me that this has to do with the fact that Rebbe Avahu was protective, I think, of the Jewish people against the Romans, and these pillars represent Roman oppression. So the pillars began to cry. The Rebbe Yossi shafu marzavi de tzipora dama. That when Rabbi Yossi died, the eaves troughs, the gutters of Tzipore began to flow with blood. The Rabbi Yaakov is chamiu kochave biyamama. When Rabbi Yaakov died, you could see the stars during the daytime. Now these are all metaphors, but they describe changes in the natural order, because it's descriptive of the idea that when a tzaddik dies, it's like as if the whole world is turned upside down. The Rebbe Asi Iakru Kol Ilonaya. When Rebbe Asi died, all the trees were uprooted. The Rebbe Chia Nachisu Kipi Denura Merikia. When Rebbe Chia died, the Kipi Denura, these sort of the shooting stars, were removed from the sky. The Rebbe Menachem Ishto Tzalmanaya V'havu L'Machalatzaya. When Rebbe Menachem passed away, so all of the statues and coins that had faces became smooth, because Rabbi Menachem was a person who was so meticulous to make sure that he never looked at Avodah Zarah. He would never even look at the face of a coin that had the king's face minted on it. So on that day, his reward was that all coins and every statue had its face smoothed out so that it was like a slug.
I wonder how he did transactions.
Yeah, that would be a difficult one. The Rabbi Tanchum Barchia is katsatsu kol andartaya. That when Rabbi Tanchum passed away, all of the faces of the statues of the king got cut off. The Rebbe Eliashiv is ichtaru shivin machtarta ben Arda. When Rebbe Eliashiv passed away, so there were dug 70 subterraneous tunnels in Naharda through which the Ganovim were able to steal, or so it seems like 70 basements were breached by Ganovim when he passed away. In other words, in his Zechus, there was no crime. But once he died, criminals went back to their dastardly ways. The Rav Hamnuna nechisu kipi debarda mirakia. When Rav Hamnuna passed away, hailstones or stones, big stones, it's not clear, maybe they're meteorites, it's not clear, they all fell from the sky. The Rabbi of Rav Yosef nashu kipi de paras ahadadi. When Rabbi and Rav Yosef passed away, so the foundation stones for the bridge that was over the Euphrates River, the stones started to come together and touch, and this caused the bridge to crumble. And the Abai of Rava nashu kipi de diglas ahadadi, and the same thing happened when Abai and Rava passed away. They were closer to the Tigris River, and again the stones began to come in contact with each other that were supporting the bridge, and the bridge broke. It sounds like the bridge, so the foundation at least of the bridge broke as a result. Kinoch nafshi de Rabbi Misharshia ton dikli shitzi. And finally, when Rabbi Misharshia passed away, the palm trees all started to grow thorns. All of this is descriptive of some quality that these respective sages had. And it's interesting to note that it's Abai and Rava who passed away, Rab and Rav Yosef who passed away. They put them in pairs because they were always close with each other in their Torah discussions. You normally don't have Rava without Abai and vice versa. So the point is that that's why they're compared to two sides of a river. Like you can't have one end of a bridge without the other end of the bridge. And when they die, sort of like that's represented by the foundation of the bridge collapsing. All right, anyway, you have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone.